Miami feels like summer. Summer in Brazil. Welcome, Ground Passers. Welcome to another edition of the podcast. This is another mini pod. You just have me. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you are in my new office space. I say in quotations because it's office/storage and it's still a work in progress. Very soon I'm going to be releasing a series about how I built out this space on our Substack. So it's going to be sort of the in-between tournaments content for my Substack friends or our Substack friends of Ground Pass. If you haven't been watching our Substack or receiving our newsletters, then you're missing out. Every tournament that I've attended this year, I release a daily newsletter with a mini video about what it's like behind the scenes covering all of these tournaments. So that has been really fun. It's on our Substack. I'll leave links to all of that in the description of this podcast episode so you can check it out if you want to. So when I'm not at a tournament, just so that our Substack doesn't just sort of like go fallow and have nothing on there, I will start putting out a series about how I built this space. It is still a major work in progress. If you're watching this video, you'll see that. I don't know what background I'm going to use yet. I haven't really figured out yet the internet. It's very slow down here, so I need to figure out what that situation will be if I want to truly use this as an office and start doing the podcast with Nick down here as well, because then I can kind of like Zoom and do everything down here. And it's great. The story behind why I'm using this space and everything will be all in our Substack, so I'm not going to bore you with that right now. Yay, I'm back from Miami. Miami was awesome. It was a really fun tournament. I wasn't supposed to go. If you've listened to the last podcast with Nick and I, you'll know that I was not supposed to go to the Miami Open, but I got quote unquote bullied to go by my new tennis friends. But I did get the opportunity to go and cover it for Ground Pass. Ground Pass was accredited at the Miami Open, which is such a big deal. Everyone's telling me it's a big deal, which I know it's really important because it shows the work we've done to become a reputable source of tennis content and news and information mostly in the space. So it's really cool that we are finally getting that recognition and getting accredited at tennis tournaments. This is the second tournament this year that we have gotten accredited for. We were accredited as well at the Delray Beach Open. So yeah, it was nice to go to Miami, and I'm really happy I did because I had forgotten. This is my third time going to the Miami Open. It does fall during my birthday. So I always try and, take a trip to Miami as part of my birthday. So I have been to the Miami Open before. This is my third time. And I kind of forget how much I do love the Miami Open, especially after you've been to Indian Wells and it's all about tennis paradise and, the beauty and perfection that is Indian Wells. And then you kind of forget what the Miami Open brings. And then you go there and you're like, oh, I love the Miami Open. It's such a fun tournament. And I'm going to be talking in this episode about the main differences between the Miami Open and Indian Wells, just to give you an idea if you've never been to any of them or you've been to one and not the other, just so you get an idea, because I think they're totally different tournaments that are great for different things and definitely worth the visit. Each tournament has its merits to go visit for sure. So that's what we'll be talking about in this episode of the podcast, and then also the tennis that's happened in the first week. So let's see if we can keep this mini pod to a mini pod. I have my notes in front of me here, so I'm going to be looking down at them. Again, don't worry if you're not watching this and you're just listening to it. I'm looking at my notes, But let's start with the differences between the Miami Open and Indian Wells. Obviously, Indian Wells is in Palm Springs, which is in California, and Miami Open is actually not in Miami. I think this is something that is the first thing to sort of bring up to people. It's not in Miami. So when you go to the Miami Open and you're staying in Miami, it actually is a 30-minute drive away, and depending on traffic, it can be almost an hour. It can be pretty brutal getting from Miami to the Miami Open. The first time I went to the Miami Open, I flew into the Miami airport. Now I don't. I fly into the Fort Lauderdale airport because that is closer. And I try to stay in the Fort Lauderdale area because it's so much closer to Miami Gardens, which is the location that the tournament is in. So that is one difference or even almost a similarity, because I think the closest city to Indian Wells is LA. It's a 2-hour drive away to get to Palm Springs, which is further out a little bit. But yeah, so those are where those tournaments are located. How about the weather? Well, this year specifically at Indian Wells, it was pretty cold. It was colder than it's been in previous years. But the general trend with Indian Wells is that it's hot and dry during the day, and then it's very much cooler at night, even to the extent that you need maybe a little light jacket to wear. This year, it was pretty cold. I did see people in hats and gloves. I didn't need anything like that. I'm used to the cold being from the East Coast, but it definitely was colder at Indian Wells at night this year than usual. It also was very windy. I think also that was very special to this year. It can get windy there, but I remember from last year there weren't any sandstorms, which there definitely was this year. Miami, on the other hand, like I said at the beginning of this podcast episode, feels like summer. Sorry, but it does truly feel like summer. It was the first thing that hit me as I got off the plane and landed, that humidity that just gets you. My hair was like, yay, humidity. So it definitely is a different sort of heat. It can feel it can feel hotter in Miami, even at the same temperature as Indian Wells, or Indian Wells maybe is higher because of that dry heat. You don't really feel the heat. In Miami, I think you feel the heat. You're sweating, and it can be a bit oppressive. Being at the Miami Open, I definitely had to take more breaks out of the sun to go find some shade or anything like that. So that's definitely something to consider if you're not used to it. Now, I'm usually used to the heat because we have also on the East Coast where I am, we also have, it's more humid, but I had literally been in cold at night Indian Wells with dry heat. Then I came back home to sort of 40-degree Fahrenheit weather where it's really cold and rainy. And then I was just sort of hit with the Miami humidity in Florida. So that was definitely, it took me a couple of days to adjust. And then, of course, it was time for me to go. I did not spend that long at the Miami Open. I was only there for qualifying and then the first round of the women's tournament. So weather is definitely different. So something to note. What are the grounds like? So Indian Wells is purpose-built. It is purpose-built for the tennis. I think that's partly why it's called Tennis Paradise. They have permanent structures, permanent practice courts, permanent, areas around the grounds for the tennis. That's what it is there for. I think the Olympics, the next Olympics is actually going to be in LA, and there's been a lot of talk of, will it go to Indian Wells because it's this already purpose-built venue. I don't think that will happen because it is the Summer Olympics and it's going to be hundreds. It's going to be like 110 degrees in the desert, and I don't think anyone wants to play tennis in those conditions. But yes, Indian Wells is a purpose-built site and it's gorgeous. It's so beautiful. Miami Open is not. The current venue for the Miami Open is at Miami Gardens. The Miami Gardens is a American football stadium where the Miami Dolphins call home. It is a multi-purpose venue because there are concerts there. The Miami F1 Grand Prix is also hosted at the Miami Gardens. So every year they build from scratch this tennis tournament where the main stadium is actually inside of the football stadium. So it's a stadium in a stadium. Football fields are massive. So you can actually put a tennis court, stadium, and everything inside of one. So that's where the main stadium is. And then around the stadium, they build temporary courts. They actually don't look that temporary. I think and we might as well just jump right into this. I think a lot of people are longing for the old location of the Miami Open, which was in Key Biscayne. It was a beautiful, gorgeous tennis facility by the ocean. I mean, I have seen sort of drone style footage of the location, and I'm like, wow, that must have been absolutely gorgeous. I think it's called Crandon Park, but that location doesn't exist anymore. It became too small to host what these 2-week master events have become. So the field of players that are at these masters events now is much larger. So the space became too small. And then in order to develop and make Crandon Park bigger so that the tennis could stay there, they had to get permission from the residents. Very similar to what's going on in Wimbledon right now. And the residents did not want an expansion. They didn't. So the tournament had to move and find a new home, and this is where they are now. Something to note as well, it was not easy to get to Key Biscayne. It's by the water. It took a while. It's not near Miami or Fort Lauderdale anywhere. So getting there wasn't exactly the easiest. You needed a car or Uber or whatever it was, but it would definitely be more of a journey to get there. Whereas Miami Gardens is not so much. You can drive there, Uber, train, bus. Because it's already a sporting facility, they already have the infrastructure to transport people there back and forth from Miami or Fort Lauderdale, whatever it is. So yes, it is a temporary site, as in it doesn't stay there all year round. It's not like you can go there and hit later on like you can do at the US Open location. If you didn't know that, by the way, you can hit at Flushing Meadows throughout the year, before the US Open starts. But it doesn't seem or look as temporary as it might sound. I think people do make jokes like, oh, it's in a parking lot. When you visit, if you go, it doesn't look like that. When you see it on TV, it doesn't look like that. So I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. Is that what you would say? I'm not sure, but it basically is more permanent looking than it is. And I think it's well laid out. I will agree. I do not like the center court. It kind of looks odd the way it's put in the stadium, but I don't think there's any way for them to avoid that. But I don't mostly spend my time watching tennis in the main stadium. You know me at Ground Pass. I am an outside court girly. That's where all the best stories are. So those are the grounds. What's around the grounds? Let's start with the food. The food of the Miami Open is the best. It is the best tournament food that I've had at any tournament that I visited in the United States. It is so diverse. I mean, you could get everything from tacos to burgers to pizzas to arepas to, crepes. Like, you could get all sorts of food from everywhere. And the thing I love about it is all of the vendors, or most of the vendors, are local businesses to the Miami or Fort Lauderdale area, which means that they're actually restaurants you could go to. And if you're attending the tournament and you're not really going to get to see much of Miami, I think it is great that you do get that taste of Miami at the tournament. I love that about it. It also has the best coffee on site that I've had. I think the US Open might be equal footing for it, but I really love Oceana Coffee, which is a cafe that's in the sort of Fort Lauderdale area, and then they have the booth at the Miami Open. It's really good. I like it. The US Open has Lavazza, which of course is a great brand of coffee. So I feel like they're a bit on equal footing there. But I love the food. The food at the Miami Open is great. The food at Indian Wells is different. It's definitely more sort of tournament fare, especially around the grounds. If you do want a more elevated experience, as they say, at Indian Wells, yes, they have a Nobu. They have a Nobu, which is a fancy Japanese restaurant. So that obviously is quite a bit different. Also, they have like a Mexican restaurant at Indian Wells as well. But yeah, so the food is different, but I would definitely give the win to the Miami Open in terms of food. So win in, that's the, goes in the win column for the Miami Open. By the way, I mean, I'm taking a little detour here, I'm sorry, but I'm just noticing how much noise is around this room that I'm recording in. I don't think you will hear it because I've noticed these mics that I use are really good, but if you are hearing it, apologies. It's New York. There's just sound everywhere. What's next? Things to do around the grounds. So we've talked about the food. What else you do around the grounds? I think the Miami Open also wins this category. They have this thing called the Sky View Ride, which is kind of an elevated ride above the grounds of the Miami Open that gives you a bird's eye view of the grounds. I've been on it a few times. It is a 24-minute ride, so, you have to settle in. You can't be scared of heights because it also has like a glass floor so you can look down and like see the ground. But it's 24 minutes. It's gorgeous. You get to see the F1 track as well because the F1 track is already starting to be painted and set up because the Miami F1 Grand Prix is in June or July. Can't really remember right now, but I think it is in June. So they have to start prepping for all of that. But yeah, I love the Skyview ride. I think they just did actually a little social media kind of story on the Skyview where they put players in there and then brought in some fans, and the fans were able to ride it with the players. Of course, Grigor Dimitrov did one, and it's hilarious. I'll put a link in the description of this podcast if you want to take a look at it and what the ride is like. But I like that. Also, they have padel courts at the Miami Open. So last year they had pickleball, so you could go and you could play pickleball. This year, padel is the sport. So they had a little padel court, they had instructors, you could sign up to just play with your friends. So it was a whole thing to do. And then also just in the Miami Open, there is so much lounging area. That's what I'm gonna call it. You could literally get a ground pass, I think, to the Miami Open and never go on a court. There's so many big screens all around the place. Then they have these sort of cute little lounge areas. Like some have these cabanas. They're like these really colorful, beautiful cabanas. I'll try and leave a photo if you're watching this in a video, or I will also put in a link to a reel I did about things to do around the grounds in Miami. I did that on Instagram. But yeah, so they have these like colorful cabanas that you can hang out in. And then they also have these just sections around the grounds with like cute little like couchy areas with umbrellas that you can just like hang out at and enjoy the tennis. So that is a possibility if that is something you and some friends want to do, to just go and hang out on the grounds. But it also creates a great way to take breaks. Like I said, it can get super hot and humid. In the stands are all metal. So now you're just getting heat reflected back at you. Sometimes it's nice to just take a break, go hang out on one of those, and then not miss the tennis because there's screens everywhere and you can just keep up with the tennis match that you are watching. So I do think there weren't really You know, there was like one of the practice courts at Indian Wells, they would have like different events there, like especially with kids, where it'd just be sort of like kids playing tennis and, you know, practicing their skills and things like that. But I feel like this at Miami Open is more sort of a well thought out, like what to do around the grounds if you're not just going to watch tennis, because the people coming to these events, not everyone is sort of like a, you know, I'm here to watch 7 hours of tennis. You know, they want to do other things as well. So I think the Miami Open did a really good job there with that. Attendees, what are the crowds like? Very different. There are very different crowds at the tournament. At Indian Wells, I think I talked about this in the mini pod, especially when I talked to Will Buchek from Tennis Tribes. He's our doubles friends, and we love to talk doubles with him. But the Indian Wells crowd is a very tennis savvy crowd. If you're in that Palm Springs area, California area, what are you doing there? It's golf and tennis. So a lot of these audience members, fans, they are fans of the sport and they know the sport inside and out. You do get casuals, obviously. This is a massive tournament, but it's definitely a very savvy crowd. I made comments that even on the practice courts, like people almost kind of respected the whole like quiet in between points and not getting up and moving per se in between points, which I found so odd, because I thought, we're in a practice court, you can move and do whatever you want. But they just knew that about tennis in a way. And at the Miami Open, it's completely different. I think it is a very casual crowd. They love tennis, obviously, but I think you get more casuals at the Miami Open. It was spring break this week and weekend at the Miami Open, so you're getting a lot of kids who are just there on spring break, looking for a good time in Miami, who are just coming to hang out and have a good time, which I love because it just brings a vibrancy and youth and happiness to this tournament that I love. And then also you get a very international crowd compared to Indian Wells in Miami. When I stepped on the grounds in Miami, I don't think I heard English for at least the first half hour. All you hear in the grounds are Spanish. It was actually quite interesting, because I thought, oh my God, are we in, you know, where are we in South America? Because that's what it feels like a little bit with the crowd. And I think people have said this a lot about the matches where either Brazilians are playing or Argentinians or anyone from South America is playing. It is just so electric. And you get that because the crowd are from those countries. It feels like mini Davis Cup. I'll talk about Joao Fonseca a little bit later in this episode, but it did feel like mini Brazil every time he was around. A few more things. Practice courts. You know, it's not the best. The best practice courts, I feel like, at tournaments are at Indian Wells, and then during the first fan week of the US Open. Because after fan week in the US Open, all practice moves to kind of like which is kind of what's at Miami, where it's just a row of courts and you can only kind of see it on one side that's elevated chairs. It's so hard for me to explain. I will leave a photo, a link to a photo in the description of this podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I will put a photo up on the screen. But it definitely is not as accessible as Indian Wells. You can't really see every single player. And I want to say 70% of the courts are actually, you can't even access them at all. They're just covered and players can practice. And, you know, I think maybe some players might like that. It's definitely more private, I would say, especially if they're working on something specific or, you know, they just want to be out of the spotlight for a bit. So I think that's great. But as a fan experience, it's not the best fan experience if you want to watch players. Because again, most of the players, you know, the big players, even Holger Rune was on the outside course, but, you know, Novak Djokovic, Carlos Alcaraz, they're all going to get scheduled on the center court. And if you don't want to pay center court prices, practice courts is a nice way, if you're attending a tournament, to at least get a sight of your favorite player playing, points with someone else. So yeah, it practice courts, not the best. And the last point I had here, what's my favorite court? Because I talked about that, I think, at Indian Wells. At Indian Wells, I really do love court 4. Court 3 and 4 are definitely where it's at Indian Wells. And Miami Open's a little different. It's wherever the Latin American crowd is. Wherever they are, whatever matches they're at, that's my favorite court, because I think that's what the Miami Open's about. Yes, sure, do you want to see specific players? I get that totally. But I tend to just follow the Latin American crowd because it is a vibe. It is an experience, and if you haven't experienced Davis Cup before or anything like that, I think it's great to just have that sort of tennis experience. It's almost like being at a soccer match, and I find that very fun because you don't get that a lot at tennis matches. That's what I love the Miami Open for. So that's those are the big differences, I think, between both tournaments. You can like either or. I think either tournament in the Sunshine Double gives some sort of value to fans, and I really appreciate it. I love the differences. I feel like if every tournament was a carbon copy of each other, it wouldn't be as fun. Let's talk quickly about the tennis. What has been drawing my eye at this tournament? What are the stories coming out of the Miami Open? We have to start with Alex Eala. Alex Eala is having quite the run at the Miami Open. She is a young player from the Philippines. She is an alumni of the Rafa Nadal Academy and also a US Open Junior champion. 2022 was the year she won, and she's just been trying ever since to break through into the main tour, the main WTA tour, and it just hasn't happened. She hasn't gone past, up until this tournament, she hadn't gone past the second round at a Masters 1000 event, and she also had not made it ever to the main draw of a Grand Slam. And this week, she's just having quite the week. She has beaten two former Grand Slam one former in Yelena Ostapenko and one current in Madison Keys. And, she also beat Katie Volynets as well. And she's just having a lovely run. And I think also what kind of, took this sort of run to the next level is, at first, she was rumored to be dating Coleman Wong, Coleman Wong is a player from Hong Kong, got the biggest win of any player ever from Hong Kong by beating Ben Shelton in the second round. And, he's also having his moment at the tournament. And then it was rumored they were dating. Some photos came out of them together. Turns out they're just friends, but still, just the lovely story of friendship, romance, tennis. Who's going to write the movie, right? But yes, I think that's definitely been one of my favorite stories coming out of the Miami Open so far, just following Alex's story. And she's playing today, Paula Badosa. Let's see how that goes. She, I think, actually has a good chance of getting through that match. And can you imagine? Then she's in a quarterfinals of a 1,000 level event, right? We will find out next week how that all goes. Next story is, this was also kind of a big story. All of the male semifinalists of Indian Wells are out of the tournament in their first round, which is the second round of the tournament. So that means Carlos Alcaraz, Jack Draper, Holger Rune, Daniil Medvedev all lost their first matches at the Miami Open. I don't think the reasoning behind that for all four of them is the same. Yes, conditions change coming from Indian Wells into Miami, very different conditions there. But I think there are different reasons for each player. I think Daniil Medvedev talked about some injury. Carlos Alcaraz just didn't play his best, although he was playing against David Goffin, who has beat him before, and I think does play really well against him. Jack Draper might have just been tired, exhaustion. Yeah, so Holger Rune lost to Riley Opelka. I don't think any of these are particularly bad losses, but it is striking that they were all out in their first matches of the tournament. Then there's Joao Fonseca, who we might as well call the Miami Open the Rio Open, because that's what it feels like in Miami. The Brazilians are out for him. So he played Lerner Tien in his second round match, and Lerner lost the match. And in his Instagram post, he was like, goodbye, hope to see you again. Miami Open next year. But in the location on Instagram, he put Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, because that is how it felt. He's the American playing in Miami, Florida at the Miami Open. And all the cheers were for Joao Fonseca. It was a completely packed Brazilian crowd. And it goes to show the metropolitan nature of Miami. They're just people from all over the world who live there, especially Latin America. But I think Joao can really consider Miami as another home tournament because they're all out there for him. And a little incident happened actually at the tournament. So the match between Joao Fonseca and Lerner, was it the Lerner Tien match or no? That was already on center court. But I think it was his third round match, was supposed to be out on grandstand. And all the matches on center ended quickly. I think one of them ended in retirement, and they were just really quick matches. So they did have a window. And then they moved Joao's match from grandstand, which was the third match on grandstand, to the main stadium, and it just caused pandemonium, which is not great. These things happen. I think if you're a tennis fan, if you start following tennis and going to tennis tournaments, the scheduling it's flexible. Can I say that? It's flexible. I always get friends who are sort of like, oh, I want to see this person at this time in this place. I'm like, that's not how it works. The schedule is going to be released the afternoon, evening before. So you either wait to buy tickets after the schedule is out, or just try your luck and hopefully a player that you want to watch is on a court where you have a ticket for. And that's what happened in the Miami Open. They all, he was going to be on grandstand. You had all these people with ground passes who had been camping out for 2 matches before. So you had people camping out 2 matches before to wait to make sure they had a seat for Joao Fonseca's match. And then last minute, they move it over to the main stadium. And I get the frustration of fans because to have it be that last minute is a bummer. And of course, the tournament did offer you could upgrade your ground pass, but then now you're paying extra money for the ticket. So yeah, that was a thing, but Joao Fonseca is having quite the moment at the Miami Open currently. What else tennis-wise? I have 2 more things actually. Gael Monfils is still at it, guys. He is still at it, and it's so great to see. He's 38 years old, still drawing the crowds. Like, his matches are packed. They're fun. Everyone's having a great time. And he's winning. He's winning these matches, which at 38, after suffering a lot of injury last couple of years and now coming back playing so well, like he's still 20. It is so great to see that he's still around. So in basketball, the guy jumping in the basketball NBA logo, how it's a player? If ever the ATP was to get someone, a player, to represent them on a logo, it has to be Gael Monfils. Those jumping forehands, Gael Monfils would be that image for the ATP. Really fun watching him. It's been great. Another person doing really well at the Miami Open, Emma Raducanu. She is into the 4th round and is just playing well. It's funny because she came into this tournament with a coach, Vladimir. I think his name is Vladimir. I'm looking at my notes here. I don't have it, but I will leave his name in the description and maybe on the screen somewhere here. But She had a coach coming into the tournament. He was on trial for 2 weeks, and he did not even make it to the first match. I guess they weren't gelling, which is interesting because I was at the Miami Open and I saw that she was practicing, and I went to the practice court and she was working with him. Like, they were working on serves and returns and things like that, and I took some great footage. And then the next day it was like, oh, actually she's not working with him. I don't know if I'll release the footage. I have it. It's great footage of Emma serving, so maybe I will at some point, maybe after the tournament. But it was actually really funny that that happened. But she's doing well. She's doing really great. I think she had Mark Petchey, who's in the Miami Open, working for Tennis Channel, and I think has worked with her before earlier on in her career. He's in her box helping her out. She gets Amanda Anisimova next to in the fourth round. So we'll see how that match goes. Amanda Anisimova had her own issues. I think this is the one drama of the tournament so far. But yesterday, actually, she was playing against Mirra Andreeva, and they got to a third set. Mirra was leading the third set with a break. They were at 3-1. Mirra was serving, and at 40-40, while Mirra was serving, Amanda stops the match to take a medical timeout. She had a blister, which we've now seen footage of the blister. It looks really awful, bad, sucky, fine. But I just don't think medical timeouts should be taken in the middle of a game, especially when your opponent is serving. I just think there's a lot of gray area in the rules sometimes, and I'm just like, I didn't even know that was possible, that you could just stop a game in the middle of the game while your opponent is serving for a medical timeout. So it could be anything. Yeah, that was definitely something that I didn't know was possible, and I thought was really odd. I think personally, if she couldn't really, because what she was basically saying is she couldn't hold her racket. And I was like, well, then you just either have to forfeit that game and then take the medical timeout, or at least wait till the end of the game to take your medical timeout and fix it and then fight back to win, whatever it was. But either way, she did break back. She won the match in the end, and she gets to play Emma Raducanu today. So we will see how that goes. That's been the first week of the Miami Open. It's been a great tournament. It's been super fun to watch. I'm really, again, happy that I got to go. We will be back next week. Nick and I will be back next week, where we'll be talking about the second week, whoever wins, our, last thoughts on the tournament. Here's what I'll say too. We had a Q&A. On Instagram about the Miami Open. So I am extending this to our podcast listeners. If you have any questions, comments about the Miami Open, shoot us an email, shoot us a DM, send us a carrier pigeon message. Let us know what your questions are, and we will answer them in the next episode of Ground Pass next week. So send those in. The spring swing is almost over, but we have a couple more tournaments left in the States. Houston is coming up, and also Charleston, which will be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for those last two tournaments before they are actually also the beginning of the clay season, technically, because then the rest of the tour heads over to Europe and the clay season starts in earnest. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ground Pass. Please leave us a comment, give us a 5-star rating. It really does help in spreading the word of the tournament. Thank you already to everyone who has and who leaves us a message in that rating. It's really lovely to read. You can also leave us questions there if you want as well. I know some podcasts do that too, where you can leave a rating and leave a question there as well. So if you want to do that, feel free. But thank you so much, and we will see you, Nick and I, next week. Bye, guys.